Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Camilo Loaiza Bonilla, and I am the 2025-2026 Eleanor Merritt Fellow here at the Ringling, the John and Mabel Ringling Museum of Art. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the historic Aslo Theater at the Ringling for this morning's panel discussion. Before we begin, I have a few announcements to make. First, if you have not yet visited the exhibition Nuestro Vaivén, Our Sway, in the Syrian wing, we hope you will choose to do so following this talk. This theater is equipped with T-coil technology, and you can connect directly using your app or hearing aid. Bathrooms are located outside of the theater in the McKay Visitors Pavilion. Please, no food or drink inside the theater and no flash photography. And now, without further ado, it is my honor to welcome the indomitable guest curator for Nuestro Vaivén, Amy Rosenblum-Martín. Amy Rosenblum-Martín is a New York City-based independent curator of museum exhibitions and biennials known for community engagement. Former staff of the Guggenheim, the Metropolitan, the Bronx Museum, and Pérez Art Museum, Miami. This year, she is co-curating the Cuenca Biennial in Ecuador and curating Nuestro Vaivén, Our Sway for the Ringling Museum. Amy brings a wealth of experience and insight, and we are fortunate to have her here at the Ringling to moderate this panel discussion, featuring some of the leading voices in contemporary Latin art dialogue. Amy will be introducing each of the speakers, and I would like to add my gratitude and excitement for each of these remarkable scholars for providing their time and viewpoints with us today. Without further ado, please help me in welcoming Amy Rosenblum-Martín.
Would everyone come out, please? Klaudio, Kristen, and Marie. Welcome you all. Thank you so much for coming today and joining us. Thank you so much, Camilo, for your beautiful introduction. It's been amazing to work with you on this project. Thank you to the Ringling for bringing us all together and for supporting this unusual way of making an exhibition. Without artists, there are no exhibitions. The 22 artists in Nuestro Vaivén are absolutely brilliant, each in their own way. Why am I not asking them to speak here today? Because artists speak volumes through their art. They've also had other programs and will continue to have programs here. Some artists are good talkers, some are not. Talking isn't necessarily their job, so please go see their art. Likewise, curators speak through exhibitions. Please see my exhibition if you haven't already, it's just across the way. Talking is part of my job, so I will address what can't be seen there in the exhibition, the process of organizing this exhibition. Why did I ask these colleagues to speak with me here today? Because while Nuestro Vaivén is about art, it's also about curatorial and museological methodologies. So I'll tell you quickly how this project got started. I got a phone call out of the blue from the wonderful director here, Stephen Hine, saying, might you be interested in curating this, our first, or one of the first major exhibitions of Latinx contemporary art at the Ringling. And my first question was why? Because the category Latin art doesn't really say much. Latin art can be everything and anything. And in the end, if you've seen the exhibition, I hope that's one thing that you walk away with, is that Latin art can be anything. And it is everything. And he said, well, our goals as a museum are to increase our local Latin audiences, to expand them and to serve them better. And at that point I was like, yes, I would love to be a candidate, please, because that's really what fires me up. We're hoping that this exhibition can be of artists who live from about Orlando south, including both coasts of Florida. And I had lived and worked in Miami for a long time in the 90s. And I'm still close to my Miami art community, so Miami was covered pretty easily. But then for the rest of the state, I had to do quite a bit of research, and people like Christian here in the Black, who were more familiar with the northern part of the region, helped recommending artists to visit. So I did about 30 studio visits, which meant coming down quite frequently out of New York City to do these studio visits for research and talking to colleagues. And when I started these research trips last year, I first visited Miami. And after this long drive from Sarasota, I'm not used to driving, so I live in New York City, I had lunch with colleague friends, including Aldeide here and Marie here in the end. And I told them about the project, and with much love and appreciation, they showered me with such exciting and constructive criticism, historical precedents, and alternative ideas for how to approach this juicy exhibition opportunity. I knew then that I wanted to have this panel discussion, which is really similar to that conversation, except with a different set of people, which overlaps. Aldeide and Marie were there, as I mentioned. The other people who were there were William Cordova, Francisco Massot, both of those are artists in Nuestro Vaivén, and Merle August. Is he here today? Somewhere. Okay. Who is a fashion designer, among many other things. My other curatorial colleagues here are Klaudio and Christian. Klaudio and I worked together at the Bronx Museum recently on the exhibition Swagger and Tenderness, the South Bronx Portraits by John Ahern and Rigoberto Torres. Rigoberto's in this show. And that exhibition really led up to this one in significant ways that we may get to talk about today. And Christian here, whom I've connected with in the Bronx and in Tampa, introduced me to numerous artists north of Miami for the show, namely Edison Peña-Fiel, with whom I just, he has a major installation here in Nuestro Vaivén, and I just got to give a talk with him at the Cuenca Biennial in Ecuador, which I got to co-curate. We are in excellent company today, representing Chile in South America, Cuba, and Haiti in the Caribbean, and Nicaragua in Central America by way of Miami, St. Pete, and Tampa. Okay, so I'm gonna, and New York, and Colorado, and Maine, and all kinds of places. I'm gonna tell one more quick story about the community leaders, which is probably unpredictable, and then I will go ahead and introduce these people and get the conversation started. So the story of the community leaders. Okay, so this is a methodology that I've been developing for years now, and I think I'm starting to get known for this methodology where as an independent curator, before I propose an exhibition to a museum, I like to talk to people who live in the vicinity of the museum to see if my idea makes any sense to them, how they could make it better, more useful for them, more enjoyable for them, etc. When I talk about community leaders, I'm talking about not organizations, but like individuals who have charisma and they have they have a following. And they don't consider themselves part of the art world. They're not artists or art workers. And I'm really interested in listening to them. Listening is at the heart of all of this. And then how do you get artists and institutions to also listen and serve these broader publics is the key, right? So in the case here, it took me a while to find my 4 community leaders, but they're awesome. I'll tell you who they are. They are Ada Toledo. These are all Sarasota-based people. Ada is a Dominican hair salon owner, and Dr. Manny Gordillo is a Peruvian doctor in public health. We have Diana Gonzalez, who is a Mexican radio personality, and we have Gloria Noemi Lopez Herrera, who is a Nicaraguan organizer of new immigrant entrepreneurs. So I invited them and the 8 artists who were commissioned to make new installations to this building, actually. That happened around January for what I call the hinge meeting, because the whole project hinged on this meeting. So I paired them up in groups of 3. So it was 2 artists together with 1 community leader. And I had written a list of questions for the artists. Well, first of all, they toured the wonders of the Ringling to get a sense of, what is here and what they're responding to, perhaps with their new installations, like the Circus Collection, the Renaissance and the Baroque paintings, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see. I had made a list of questions, so the artists sat down and asked the community leaders in their small groups these questions, like, tell me about yourself, tell me about your community, what do you care about, what's difficult for you, what are you proud of, what do you care about, what are your ideas, sort of thing. Like, it was a long conversation, and the artists were taking notes, and only after listening did they start thinking about their ideas for what installations they were going to make. So these installations are in view, as many of you have already seen, in the steering wing. They are standalone artworks, but also they serve as the context for the culmination of the project, which is that these community leaders are each making a community celebration of their own choosing, sponsored by the museum, in the space, in the installation that was created for them. So the celebrations themselves are the cherry on the top. We have an interesting way of organizing this panel discussion today. It's not exactly the regular thing, which I love, and I'm gonna let Marie, whose idea it was to do it this way, because she's so good at figuring this stuff out, explain it to you. But I just want to quickly, let me just say who these people are. Aldeide is the founder and director of Women Photographers International Archive, WOFA, Miami, with whom I've worked on and off, right the beginning, maybe? Almost the beginning. Klaudio is the executive director and CEO of the Museum of Fine Arts in St. Petersburg. He used to be the director of the Bronx Museum, where we get to work together in New York. Christian is a lot of things. He is the Curator-at-Large at the University of South Florida Contemporary Art Museum in Tampa. He's also an independent curator and critic and former gallerist in New York City. And Marie Vickles is the Senior Director of Education at the Pérez Art Museum of Miami and the Curator in Residence at Little Key Cultural Center, Miami. We're also co-curators for the second time around of the MIA biennial in Miami with William Cordoba. Okay, I'm going to pass the mic to you, Marie, so you can explain the structure of our conversation and get us started, please.
Okay, thanks, Amy. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. So we thought about, in our discussions on how to approach the panel, to make it more of a conversation rather than each of us just lecturing from our specific vantage points and what we each do. So kind of like mix it up, in a more conversational way. We came up with different questions we either want to talk about as a group or questions each of us can dive a little bit deeper into. So I think we could start with Claudio's, one of the questions that Claudio shared with our group, which was really great, and I think it's a good way to kick us off. Thinking about how we work within community and engaging with community. So as we work with the community engaged and in a co-creative kind of approach like this one, this exhibition that you created, Amy, the question of what institutional barriers, whether related to budgets, timeline, policies, leadership, or traditional curatorial authority, have you or we can really get into like this across the board in our own works to have any of us encountered, and how do we navigate these challenges while still centering community voices and shared authorship? So this is something that, I guess, Klaudio, since this was something that you proposed to the group, maybe you can give an example of something that you yourself experienced in your career, in your work.
Director's question, by the way, you mentioned budget. Not the first thing curator mentioned.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, I am the man in the room, right? I'm the institutional guy, the one that has to run the organization and has exactly bill and I'm the one that has to pay the bills, right? Ultimately. Well, I was a curator before in Miami, and a lot of my work was centered around this. And then I was fortunate enough to work at a place like the Bronx, where a lot of the work that I did was centered around this as well. So it was actually a little bit easier to orchestrate this type of work at the Bronx. And then when you and I engaged and talked about what we wanted this exhibition to be, one of the drivers, of course, in this Roberto John Aaron exhibition was that, post-pandemic, the museum had this sort of range-grounded way of doing, social justice and community action, but we realized that we weren't really doing that work in the community specifically. We were presenting to the community, but we weren't engaging the community, and that's what was so exciting about this exhibition, which is what we're going to reflect back out into the community. It's really important post-pandemic because we wanted to sort of drill down and back to who we were as an institution. But, from my perspective, maybe you can mention sort of working with me, right? I mean, I had also, of course, the pressure where it comes to dealing with my board and my community and my support and my funders and budgets and how we were going to put this together. And maybe it's not the right experience you had with me, because I think we were so open to that dialogue, and I was very set back in the way that I approached it with you, and I allowed and wanted that level of unknown to perform. But I'm sure you've all worked in different institutions, and now that I'm at the MFA, which is a very, very different institution from the Bronx, it's been a learning curve for me as well, which is more rooted in tradition, and I'm actually trying to slowly but methodically upend some of those models, but understanding all the other guardrails and challenges that I have institutionally. So I'd love to hear from you as working with other institutions how those exchanges have happened, from leadership and community, etc.
Good.
I mean, I think when you're at the Bronx, the Bronx is a place, the Bronx Museum is what we're talking about here. And the Bronx Museum is a place where the social justice argument or ideas around social justice are kind of baked in. Whether they're actually sort of being driven by the community or by engagement with the community, or they're being produced and distributed, as it were, from the Sounding Institution. Because you mentioned a shortfall there. But I mean, I would say that the context is everything. But at the risk of saying something so general that it's almost meaningless, but it's everything in terms of politics, in terms of sort of how culture moves, right? And it works the same way for institutions and for certain kinds of curatorial efforts. There are some places that I think are genuinely sort of friendlier to certain kinds of approaches, right? And others not so much. And so the efforts from within a curatorial approach have to adapt, it seems to me, right? And I know that sounds, again, general enough to seem unspecific, but the specifics are, that saying, the devil's in the details? Well, there it is. It's all about the devil and those details and working them out in ways in which the institutions themselves can actually do their job effectively, so that there's buy-in from folks within the institution. I mean, staff is its own sort of community, right? Among other things, right? Boards represent their own community, as you well know, right? If any of us would have to work with unions, that's also an issue. There's press, which is its own community, right? And then outside of that, there are a multitude of communities that folks need to sort of engage with. And in fact, more crucially, or increasingly crucially, to the degree that we believe in the idea of access to art. And I think all the people on this stage do think that is an absolute mission for art institutions. Not to, this is a sidebar, but, Amy, I visited the show yesterday. Congratulations, it's a fantastic show. It really, really is. I wish I could be present for some of the activations, as it were, right? But I really sort of want to applaud your method. The Amy Rosenblum-Martín curatorial method, that you just described, where you go in and you do the questioning first, because I think it's rare, right? It's not the way we usually work, right? It's certainly not the way I usually work, and I think there's a lot of lessons to be drawn from that. But I do also sort of want to ask you, and you can get to this after, we all sort of do a round on this, is your methodology for approaching the community leaders that you approach, right? And again, because context is a lot, how that changes from context to context. I think that's an interesting thing to address. But I'll shut up now and pass the mic on.
Yes, thank you. I really having a pleasure to acompañarte, to have you, to be along you in this process since the beginning of the conversations. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking in my place and what are the challenges that I have faced. First of all, I think there is a change in the hierarchy, but in the order. Because one thing is working from the institution, as you have said, but the other is building an institution. I feel that when I came from Cuba in 2016, and I found myself in this very, we can say, even welcoming for some people space, but hosting as well in other scenarios, and in an environment, even being Miami, where everyone was saying that this is not a place for being an historian. Miami is not a place for a scholarship. So it's like going and building coalition is about finding those people who are your people and going, because I think that community work has always been there. But the thing is that institutions that have been doing that work, that we call smaller institutions, is because they don't have these big budgets, they don't have, all the infrastructure. But in all our communities, there is people that have been doing that job. So it's about, or at least for me, the first thing was about identifying who those people were and, learning from them, taking their legacy, and taking that as a point of departure, building something. I had the belief that, or even I wasn't tired at all, I said, I am not going to ask the institution to provide these spaces for me. I am going to take it. I am going to build the institution. And then within those spaces, I have been able to identify allies. That's why I have been able to create friendships, what has become with Marie, what has become with Amy, and through that way, I start a process of what I call contaminating the institution, being like a kind of virus that goes and then it's able to impact the institution. So my work has been an invitation, and that's how I approach. I invite you to join me in my mission because I think it's valuable, because I think that it's about providing justice. Reparatory justice to our history, because it hasn't been fair, and I think that the main challenges have been on that, have been bringing people or convincing them in the process, because even when we speak about boards, I haven't had that kind of experience, because the people who have joined me are people that believe in the mission, so they have been companions. Not people that are coming to frame the work or the beliefs or the structure. So I think that in that sense, having a different process where it has been healthy for me because it's rooted in community and has allowed me to grow organically and protected.
Awesome. Yeah, I can answer a little bit on this. I think one of the reasons I really love working with you, Amy, and even the conversations we have that have helped me think about my own curatorial practice and also education is because you approach it, at least in my opinion, from a very, what I would say is like an educational lens. I think curating and quote unquote educating are one and the same. So in that regard, the question of like, I was looking at the different areas of like challenges related to budgets, timelines, policy, leadership, or traditional curatorial authority. I was like, all of them. I think they're all challenging in different ways. You know, sometimes within institutions, we move in different speeds than, you know, we move as individuals out in the world, you know, trying to get contracts back from folks, getting meetings set up, like the things that, you know, the logistics behind making a space that is very structured, open to the nuance of what it means to be in a community. Whether that's like, oh, I need to bring my child or my children with me today to like finish this work, or you know, where are we gonna store all the instruments for the presentation, or like, you know, like all these little things, and of course like timelines, budgets, oh God, but it's all worth it. And I love what you said about the different stakeholders, like the different communities, like because community is such a broad word. And when we see that, we have to think about like all the different communities. Like your board is a community. You know, like the artists, they're a community. The artists in the community, the people that love museums and come to every single thing. Like this, you all here, you're like the diehard community that is like, I want to learn more. I want to hear more. I want to be inspired. So I think the docents, because anyone that's a docent, even about docents. Yeah, like there's so many different stakeholders, and that we have to think about, and the way you make space for them, and not only make space, but like actually involve them in the process of making a project, an exhibition, or program. Those are the things like I think a lot about in educational programming at PAM, Pérez Art Museum, Miami, and also when I curate shows. Like, how does this become relevant to the people that are going to actually experience it, the artists that are making the work? Because if no one sees the work, no one experiences it, what's the point, you know? So
to respond to what you were asking me, Christian, about like the context of these community leader or this methodology that I've been developing, yeah, well, that's definitely real. So I think the first time that I did this intentionally was for my Ana Mendieta show at the Sugar Hill Children's Museum in Harlem in New York. And if you're familiar with Ana Mendieta's work, if you're not, look it up. She's amazing. She unfortunately died in the 80s, but her work has lived on in a big way. She's a canonical figure. She's Cuban. She knows Cuba. She is going to have a retrospective at the Tate that opens next summer. But anyway, so I got to, her work is known for growing up clergymen primarily, but I always sort of had this inkling about her having lived in Miami among her friends for a long time, that she was actually quite a playful person, despite her sometimes fierce and always intense and serious work, which was that she had this playful side. And so I got to curate an exhibition of her work supported by her family at this children's museum in New York, which was surprising to everyone. I think the family loved it because it like gave me narratives about her work and about her as a person. But anyway, but it was such a crazy idea that was the first time that I was like, before I propose this exhibition, let me talk to people to make sure that this makes sense to someone outside of my head, so it's not an echo chamber. And I live walking distance from that museum, and so my first community advisory group, as I called it then, was my friends, who were moms who didn't consider themselves part of the art world, and their kids, because the intended audience for that show was 5 to 8-year-olds who lived in Harlem. So I gathered 5 to 8-year-olds who I knew very well and started asking them this question. That's how this came to be. So I love your question about the context. Like that, this was a very different process. Like we all gathered in our little Manhattan apartment to talk about that. Very different process from what's happening here in Sarasota, where I don't think I'd ever been in Sarasota before. I was very honored to be hired for this job. And so how do I find the people, right? And one of the key factors, I have to say, is working with a co-curator or a community curator who is of the community. So for Swagger Tenderness at the Bronx Museum with Klaudio, I was super honored also to be curating that exhibition of the Bronx's, arguably the Bronx's best known artists in the world, John A. Hernandez, Bartek Torres. But I was like, why me? My dad actually did grow up around the block from the Bronx Museum, but I don't consider myself of the Bronx necessarily. So I thought of Ron Kavanaugh, who wound up being my co-curator for the show. But Ron was born, raised, chooses to live in the Bronx. He runs a literary freedom project. He's a literary activist. And we had worked together on staff at the Bronx Museum a million years ago, in the time of the dinosaurs. And she was like the perfect co-curator for that show, and he rooted the project in the Bronx in a way that was very authentic and genuine. And I knew I needed a Ron for this project because I didn't have any roots. Oopsie, like my bad.
Since
I did Ron.
what's interesting with Rod too is he doesn't come from art. He comes from literature. And you need the incredible factor for perspective, right?
Exactly, and so I had found a Ron here who's Javi Suarez, who is ill today, or else he would be here with us, and he's the community curator. He is likewise for architecture. He does make paintings. He's an artist here, and he was on the board here. But most importantly, he grew up here. He loves Sarasota, and he's very active in the pan-Latin American scene here. And he helped me find two out of the 4 community leaders. And he led me to the St. Jude Catholic Church's annual fall festival, where I met a third, one of our community leaders. And he's just been, that route. So I think that's my technique for getting around when I don't have all my buddies as community advisors. That's another thing that you mentioned, Aldeide, actually, is that friendship has become important in curating and in coalitions. When I started being a curator in the 90s, that was a no-no. That was conflict of interest. And you couldn't, as a curator, I wasn't allowed to work twice with the same artist, for example. I wasn't allowed to be friends with the press, for example. And then just recently, I had a conversation with Luis Enrique Pérez, and I was like, I kind of still feel guilty for working with the same artist more than once, because you're an independent curator, you can do whatever you want. And friendship is real, it's genuine. And so all these people on the stage, I consider my friends. I find that to make everything so much stronger. Do you want to read another question?
I forgot I had a mic right here. Let's look at some of the other things we had talked about. I just want to mention, though, the workshop. that happened on the first day, the opening celebrations, the workshop with Rigoberto. It was so fun. It was so fun. And he's such a showman. He is. And I think that was actually a really special experience too. Like thinking about how to make the process of art making real for everyone that's come into that space.
Well, I just wanted to say that when I talk about historical precedent of this kind of curating, it comes out of art making as much as out of curating. Mm-hmm. And he's a perfect example of that. So that's like,
Sorry, you were doing live casting?
it just,
Doing live casting?
yes, sir.
Fantastic. Fabulous.
Yeah, there was a moment where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm actually seeing how this work is made for the first time. Like I've seen this work so many places at your show. I think we have some of this work at PAM. It really like struck me. I was like, this is happening like right in front of my face. I can't believe
And the
it.
people who were cast were being honored as members of the Latin community here, and the museum sponsored that. They did.
Yeah. So, okay, I have a question for, it's for all of us, right? As we're conversing. So, I remember you talking a little bit about, from an outside perspective, like one of your, I don't know if a member of a colleague or someone within the community had said, I want to do something at the museum. Like, how do I do an event there? How do I, like, do something there? And this idea of, like, how do you create these spaces or, like, create, like, a familiarity within community so that they feel like, hey, this is my space too, whether I'm coming just to, like, walk on the beautiful grounds and look at the water or go in, experience art, or go for something else. Like, I'm going to take my family, we're going to have an event. Like, how each of you, I guess, how do you connect the work you do to like everyday lived experiences of how people can engage with the museum space?
Sorry, geez, the frog in the throat there. Again, various ways. I did a biennial in Dublin, Ireland, a long time ago now, in 2011, and I always say it took about 5 years off my life. It was actually tough, frankly. It really hard. It was quite successful, but it was a slog. And one of the things that we had to do was actually retrofit a medical school so that would be the centerpiece of the exhibition because it was a citywide show. And while we were doing it, someone had the bright idea, and I confess it wasn't me. Though I wish it had been, because I could take full credit. But someone had the idea of essentially putting a crash into the grounds, the institution that was this new sort of like building or representative building, a nursery school. Why? So that parents, and especially moms, could come, during working hours and basically deposit their children there while they took advantage of the exhibition, right? And families could come and do the same and involve the children as much as the parents. And I still think that is an absolutely sort of brilliant idea, not just for biennials, but for art institutions. And I know that art institutions are all about sort of the cafes and the merch and the shop, and all that stuff is also important. By the way, we had a cafe at the shop, because that also sort of drives the gate, and it brings people in where they might not otherwise come in. It's a magnet, and you make a little money, which is absolutely fundamentally necessary for any of these enterprises. But the creche thing, the nursery was just, that was terrific. That's out of the experiences that I've had sort of doing these types of shows, that's something, that's a great takeaway for me. And I still wonder why it is that, certainly more in the States, I think, than in Europe, that kind of effort doesn't exist institutionally.
what we have been speaking a lot about, for me, one of the main ways of feeling people welcome in the space is by listening. And yeah, I think, having that first approach about identifying what are the needs, later as well, I think that language plays a very important role. You all, Amy and Marie, you have been part of the congresses that we organize at the Pérez Museum Miami with WOFA every 3 years. This is a big event that brings together the international photography community to Miami to discuss our project topics related to women and photography. And one of the elements that is most celebrated, and I really love about the Pérez Museum Miami, is that the programs are presented in Creole, Spanish, and English. And that always, just like that, makes you feel that you are in the right place. And that has been a change that we have seen in many other institutions. In the city, we see the MoCA, Museum of Contemporary Art in North Miami. You go to the museum as well, there is in Creole or English or Spanish, English. But in a city that is as diverse, it is important to have that present. And I just wanted to share as well about, because the other element of finding those people in the community, I mean, identifying partners, identifying local businesses, identifying people that are outside of the art world, but that also have something to say. And for me, being educated in the University of Havana, I wanted to reference an experience that is called in the historiography of Cuban art as pedagogical projects. These are projects that took place at the late 80s and during the 90s, basically where artists were putting themselves at the service of the other. And there is one particular example that, since Amy was speaking about this project, resonated with me, and that also has influenced my approach of radical pedagogical curating, if you want. But there is a project made by artist René Francisco called La Casa Nacional. And in this project, he took the students of the Higher Institute of Art to a group, we call it the Solares. How do you say solar in English? But it's like a kind of group building, or a building where art projects were. He brought the students to these projects, and then per students, they identified a house. And the goal was that the student needed to work daily with the people in that house, resolving their needs, material or spiritual. So that was a project that took place during a month. But for me, it's a practice of dismantling these hierarchies between the artists and the audience, and in a process where the audience also becomes participant of the creative art. And in a way, when you are also open to see art happen in unexpected places. It's just not only thing that the museum is the place where the art lives. It's more like taking the notion of Joseph Beuys, or this idea of the social sculpture, where everyone can be an artist. And I think that's the approach that we all understand and that we all take. That is that kind of humility, that kind of responsibility and honor of recognizing that the other people have something to teach us as well. And how that creates a kind of relation, that creates a kind of collaborative process. And that's how, when you come with that approach, I think that the rest just happen. But that's at least how I have done it through my projects. It's like following this kind of philosophy. We did it with the Congress. In 2024, the main idea of the program was about, we did that program responding to the challenge that more than 75% of photography students are women. Still, there are no academic programs in universities that specifically address women in photography. So these artists are mostly, or these students are mostly receiving the stories, a story made by, most of the time, white men from the US, from Europe, from centric perspectives of the North. And yes, my concern was about how we change that, how we establish other kind of narratives, how we turn this kind of hierarchy that we are seeing right now, where we put ourselves in the audience as well, in conversation with other people. But I will stop there.
I mean, I think I could talk also structurally a little bit about this. So,
Sure. I love that. Just that we'll be gradually shifting into audience questions. So, go ahead, Patrick.
sure. So I think, one of the, I was very fortunate in the Bronx to have the opportunity to work on a capital campaign and a capital project to build a new building, which is currently being built. And one thing that was really interesting about the process, we had an RFP, an open RFP. We had like 50 architects apply for the process. We narrowed it down. I got to a point where about 3 or 4 architects, and they wanted sort of prompting. They wanted some ideas as institutional what the needs were. And I said, I thought about it. I'm like, we have a basic understanding that we need certain galleries, certain lighting, or certain systems, and sort of structurally we understood that. But I said, I'm going to give you guys these future prompts. And sort of make of it what you will. This is how we're going to come up with who's going to design this building. And I said, one, I thought about the Ventanita down in Miami, right? The little Cuban coffee window. And I said, this place, at least me growing up, was a place where you can go get a little cup of cafe cubano, but it was a very democratic space, right? You had, the local guy, and you had usually the politician and somebody else, and they were all engaged in conversation, usually around Castro, by the way, but it was a very democratic space, right? Everyone was at the same level. I said, take that. I said, number 2, think of the corner bodega out in Brooklyn, right? And again, I go in there, and the local person is this place where people meld and have conversations, and there's not that stratification that happens in institutions, right? And then the other thing I said is when I, being from Miami originally, when you had your get-togethers, you go out in the backyard, you jump in the pool, but in New York, I have people, spill out into the street, right? They have their barbecues and they crack open a fire hydrant and they play music. And as I walk across from the subway into the museum, you're running into all these families. You should become part of that little micro family for a minute. I said, those were the 3 prompts I gave the architects. I said, capture that spirit in the architecture of this building. That's what we're trying to accomplish at the Bronx. That's what we want to be. We want to be those spaces. And, an architect rose to the occasion, moral architects. And, it's creating that democratic space where you feel welcome, you can stay, there's no pressure there. It's a space for dialogue, and also the art class to bleed out into the street and come back inside. So that was something that was really important for me as far as access. And then even something very basic as bilingual labels and bilingual websites that were not existing in communities largely Puerto Rican and Dominican. So we implemented those things. And now here at the MFA, we have this little gallery upstairs, and I'm thinking, how do I make this? So yes, we have our cafe and we have our gift shop. And even the cafe is being sort of rethought in a way that becomes much more of a community gathering center, not just you have to buy a cup of coffee to sit there. But this gallery upstairs, how do we make this one space? Because we have a big barrier, which is $24 entry fee, right? But how do we make that space a community center, space that is free all the time and accessible to the community, right? Working with artists, working with community, and that one little space will be part of that sort of free core of the museum that we want to reach. So, we take different approaches, but I think that the architectural and the way that you sort of feel in the space actually goes a long way as well.
How was that? This is such a multidimensional topic, and I feel like we just scraped the tip of the iceberg. Hopefully we'll keep talking together with everybody about that. But I would like to turn this over to the audience. If any of you have anything to say or share or ask, you're more than welcome to speak. My person? Oh, sure.
Peter,
favorite thing was called Marie Vickles.
Okay, let's try to say one word, space.
With artists, working with culture. When I was, I don't know, in my 20s, that's all I know I wanted to do. And to be able to actually do that, you know, decades hence is a real gift.
Second to the working with artists, I would say, or colors on the stage. I really have tried my work.
I would say the possibility of influencing and making change through art, which is more fun and interesting than politics.
That's good, yes, I fully agree with you. It's like sublimated politics, yes.
Yes, but yeah, I love that idea of thinking that we are doing something that makes us all better. But yeah, in a more formative way.
And when I said space, I mean, I think that it's interesting. I try to reduce the amount of text on the wall, and I try to communicate through the space, through the design of the space as much as possible with the artists, what the artists are trying to convey. Sometimes to experimental, which is fun.
But it can stay. He are copying bounds of financial intuition is which you just addressed versus accessibility to low income areas.
Very good question. I mean, I think it's very specific to the institution. I mean, we spoke about this earlier. I mean, in the Bronx, one of the things that was actually very good was because we were completely and totally free, all our programs, all our access was free, we were able to leverage that into a lot of foundation support, actually. That was actually part of our narrative. That's where we went forward. So they made up for what we were not doing at the box office. You know, here in St. Pete, I think the same approach. And I think, you know, if you have, you know, for example, the space that I'm talking about, we've already had a lot of interest and support for a space on because there's a lot of corporate support, individual support is interested in how allowing this access to communities. So I think if it's framed, or I think if it's, you know, the value is put forth, I think you will find that people are more than willing to support programs like that.
Kane alerts, thoughts on this?
Yeah, so like clearly most of my experience is either sitting, you know, in front of a computer and writing, because that's how I got into this game, or you know, working as a curator. But I've had a couple of 2-year spells where I mentioned the biennial in Dublin, and then I did another one in 2023 at the biennial. That is in Portland, Oregon, which was again sort of citywide. And that's, you know, it's kind of like executive experience, or it is in the sense that you're essentially sort of doing a significant amount of fundraising. That's part of your mission. You know, you're going out there to basically be with a community and get buy-ins. I mean, that's kind of a crude way to put it, but essentially to create alliances, to put your message out there, to tell everybody why a specific artistic project with a larger sort of project is important to them and to the city. Yeah, you know, it's, I guess my general comment is that it is really sort of fundamental to balance as much as possible, as many interests as you can. You know, you cannot make everyone happy in an executive position. You simply can't. And we can read down to politics if we like and think about executive positions otherwise: senators, congresspeople, mayors, presidents. But the fact is, you try and make as many people represented and fulfilled as possible, while I think trying to raise the level, right, of discourse around, in our case, culture. Right. I mean, I think that's kind of the model. It's not an answer, because it's all, again, contextual, but it is a potential sort of model spawn.
I wanted to say that at least for me, it's an ongoing discussion. Being in the process of building an institution that now has 7 years that we have been active. And Yeah, and one of the elements that, for example, we have put in place is like finding sponsors and offering fellowships for people to support certain programs. For example, we organized last 2 years ago like a very ambitious workshop, 15-day workshop with a prominent photography expert that we brought from Japan. It was like a very expensive thing to produce, and we needed, most of our programs are free, but we needed to charge for being able to the participants to attend. But I did the other work of looking for sponsors and partnering with local institutions in Miami that would be willing to support access to a certain number of artists, of people from certain communities to participate in the program. So that was one of the ways that we have done it. The other, for me, element partnering with universities have been as well one of the ways that we have implemented to guarantee access to the students, and also to establish payment by month, and not only, giving that flexibility of a payment plan. Because the reality is that you still need to maintain institution, memberships are expensive, tuition to access certain programs like workshops, sometimes, people can't afford them, but at the end, people also go to parties, they go shopping, they go to the theater, they practice other activities that also require funding. So I think that there needs to be a kind of cultivation or process as well of cultivating our audiences, that this is a job and it's needed, and that we need your support for continue doing this. So even if it's $5 a month, it makes a lot. So what we are trying is to educate that base community, that whatever they can do, even the smaller contribution is going to help us. But it's about setting that mindset, because it's important to have the big dollars, but it's also important to have the base aware that they also need to support. So that's it.
Yeah, I think $1 from 1 million people is just.
Look at the followers on Instagram.
Yeah.
We have like a big fundraising campaign coming up now with Give Miami Day. And we are saying we have 6,000 followers, for example. It's not that many, but they have global can say we have 6,000 followers. So we can reach all those people, and they can give $5. That means a lot. So that's it's a process, but we are going there.
It can work. Yeah, I think from an institutional side of things. It costs a lot of money to create accessibility auctions, whether it's seating in the galleries, whether it's interpretive services like providing programs in different languages, ASL, etc. But I think budgets are essentially your value statement. So it costs a lot, but it also brings a lot. And we are here, I think, in service of our communities. So anything that can make a space, an institution, an exhibition more accessible, it is worth it. It is worth it, and there's other ways, that you can trim and cut budgets, but you have to just little by little, maybe you can't do every single thing you want, but you have to start and make it a point to invest in ways that make a space accessible for everyone. And I also think about universal design. A space that is accessible to the most amount of people is what you want to go for. Because if one person can use it that has accessibility challenges, then everyone can use it. So thinking about how to create accessibility in those ways, and always taking it back to the budget conversation and making sure that it just reinforcing that is your value statement. And just not giving up when you're talking to the CFO.
That is it.
Do we have time for one more, or is that it? Oh, we do? Amazing. Any other comments or questions? Yeah.
Well, yes, we're stakeholders aware of what is going on in the museum. Do they know what's going on, and do they spread the information? What have you enjoyed after running right recently?
Right. Well, the 4 people who I'm referring to specifically who are in the middle of this photo on the screen, these are all people who didn't come to the Ringling previously, and that is the big win in my mind. So now my goal for the project is that these 4 people will be talking to, like, these are all charismatic leaders within their own communities, right? So they're, by word of mouth, saying, hey, come to my exhibition at the Ringling, right? So that just on a grassroots way starts to grow the Ringlers community and make more and more people just feel comfortable in a museum like the Ringling. That's the goal, right? And then, I mean, there's so much going on at the Ringling. I'm not even aware of everything going on at the Ringling. And so people hopefully will love it here and be curious and come back repeatedly.
Something that I wanted to say is that change doesn't happen in one day. So it's, I think it's great that this exhibition happened, but there needs to be an ongoing commitment from the museum, because we are always claiming that. It's like it's very important that these initiatives happen, but it's important that it's a commitment in the long term, and that is not reflected because audiences, they know when they are being instrumentalized or when there is real, the change that is being promoted. So if the museum institution wants to have that kind of approach, is really interested in getting to those audiences, cleaning those audiences, but there needs to be a presence and there needs to be visibility, and they need to see themselves reflected as you see in the mirror. That was there. I love that idea, but they need to see themselves when they come to this space, and that goes at all levels.
You spoke about this a little bit, how you've seen a change in the art world as far as like not being able to be friends before, and about these new approaches that you're taking. So I was curious to know, like, have the goals also changed for art institutions, and not just with this project, but for the panelists, your past projects, how do you measure success?
I mean, certainly, I've been part of the art world since the 90s, and I have seen a big shift in the art world, and a big opening toward where I stand, what this project represents, for sure, to the extent that, I'm an independent curator and I get work. So different museums are wanting this methodology that I've been developing, and not just stating it about me, I'm just standing in for a big group of people, including these people. And of course, things are continuing to change, and the change is accelerating right now. So how does that pushback impact us all? So far, I haven't really seen it to a great degree. Like the most recent changes and pushbacks in my working life, people are still pushing me to be myself as a curator, which is quite well represented by this project. So let's celebrate that. And again, that's not just about me. There is a desire to shift consciousness toward the positive. There is a desire to see models of hope.
Well, history, as we all know, goes in cycles, and so does culture, right? So the arc of culture, to paraphrase MLK, and to refute MLK to some degree, doesn't always, go like an arrow towards justice, whatever that might mean in terms of cultural development, nationally, regionally, globally. But I think it's unavoidable to talk about a significant sort of like almost sea change in curatorial practice and in institutional practices with respect to representation and with respect to access, and that is that the vast majority of arts institutions, the vast majority of cultural institutions in this country and I think globally in the West have tended to want to open up more and to represent better, right? And so there were holes and continue to be holes, and there will always be holes, maybe not, hopefully not as glaring as the ones that still exist or the ones that existed in the 90s or the 80s or the 70s that need to be filled by, well, you name the group or you name the, and often it's not just an issue of race and ethnicity and sexuality, it's often also a function of class. Folks that are simply not represented properly on your museum halls, among other places, during libraries. But, you know, the arc has more or less gone forward, if we can describe that direction. If we can describe that direction as one that's positive, is what you said, right? And, you know, and I do think that that's evident. We were talking in the green room a minute ago, well, an hour ago, about the fact that I'd walked through an 80s to the present collection rehang at the Museum of Modern Art. And the Museum of Modern Art historically was a museum that set up a timeline, like an arrow-like timeline of movements from basically the beginning of the 20th century forward, actually the end of the 19th century forward, that, you know, if you didn't fit in, you just simply didn't fit in. And Latin America didn't fit in, and Eastern Europe for the most part didn't fit in, and mostly black artists didn't fit in, and Native American artists definitely did not fit in, and women artists barely fit in. And walking through that collection now, which by the way includes something that you guys included very much in Nuestro Vaivén, which is sort of didactics or wall labels that also want to ask questions, inquiry style. You know, of course, at MoMA they were designed for children, which I think had been a mistake, but in any event, you know, they're there. You know, 2 years ago even, that would not have happened. You know, the fact that you could walk into that rehang and the first thing you saw was a work by a Chicano artist that an expert or a so-called expert couldn't identify. You know, that is a big statement. And if that's happening at MoMA, you know what's happening in just about every other institution in this country, and I think, again, in the West. I would say one thing, one proviso, one, I think, important bit of, well, shall we call it clapback? I think there has been some significant clapback. Again, history, like politics and culture, goes in cycles. And so, you know, I think all we need to do is pick up the paper and read about, for example, the Smithsonian's problem with the Amy Sherrill show, right? Which, you know, she essentially pulled out of because the Smithsonian wasn't willing, under pressure, to exhibit a specific work that represented the Statue of Liberty. There was a figure who was a black trans woman who you know, basically is representing liberty according to Amy Sherrill, according to the artist. And that was problematic, and they wanted to pull it, so she pulled the show. So that is a specific instance in which, you know, there has been definitive clapback, and it, you know, it's not the only one. There's plenty of those around that manifest in terms of, you know, actual censorship, sometimes self-censorship, which is worse than censorship, in the changes in basic sort of language. You know, I think the smart curators and smart institutions are avoiding certain kinds of live tripwires, you know, to essentially continue to operate with funding. But these are changes that we're all undergoing. You know, this is to say that culture, just like everything else, gets roiled and has upheavals, and we move on as best we can. But I do think, in terms of the question that you were initially asking, yes, it has changed, and it's changed a lot.
That's listening.
That was brilliant. Just really quickly, I think from the vantage point of working within education within a museum space, I see it becoming more of a extension of civic spaces, thinking of like libraries, community centers. I see us trying to kind of become closer to that, and also an emphasis on learning at all stages of life, like really embracing that and thinking about, like, we're always learning. There is no point in our life where we should not feel like you wake up today, you're like, ooh, I wonder what I'm going to learn today, right? So those are the things that excite me right now and working within the museum city.
I should have mentioned the growth of education programs and the privacy that education programs have really begun to have. I remember in the 80s and the 90s, the education programs were really siloed, and they were largely about busing children, I don't think I'm wrong, but of course we all need to do that, but I think the mission has grown significantly, and it's just become so much smarter and so much more integral to the institutional and the curatorial processes. That, you guys?
Okay. So they're pretty hill. No, thank you very, very much for demonstrating that all to us.
Thank you.
And I hope to see that. So we have a lot right here. One of our artists in this exhibition, and she has a solo exhibition at the Pérez at the Art Museum that's up right now.
Great, by the way, it's really happy.
Yeah, it's really a leading artist here in your community. She's a great show. Professor. Oh,